Hi, I'm Matt, and I talk about government. And sometimes there's a lot of government to talk about. So if the government is kind of getting you down, if you're stressed and concerned over the rise of authoritarianism in the United States, then this is probably one of the right videos for you. In my last video, we looked at the way that effective resistance against authoritarians has a trend of certain phases that it goes through. And these included things like the initial awareness, then the organization and the phase where people start to actually come together. Then comes the escalation, and then finally a transition away from authoritarianism. These are normal and frankly kind of predictable phases for us to feel like we go through with authoritarianism. However, this time we're going to be talking about something different. We're going to talk about what characterizes effective resistance against authoritarianism as opposed to ineffective resistance. It's important for us to remember during this discussion that there are a lot of us arriving at this conversation at different times. Okay, some of us are already in the awareness phase, some of us are already mobilizing, some people have been in escalation since January, and those people are tired. But we have all of us, a way of finding our way here. And wherever you are in that journey, this is probably the right time to be here. This is not going to be a sprint because you don't fight authoritarianism at a sprint, you fight it as a marathon. It is a long process. It's faster before the authoritarian rises. But once the authoritarian is at the top, it takes a lot longer to remove and undo and then sort of reconfigure a government that's not authoritarian so that it can be driven. And that's the transition phase. But for us, we have to outlast an authoritarian. And that means sticking around long enough, fighting long enough that his support starts to falter. Before we can really get into this conversation, we need to make sure that we're in agreement on a few foundations. The first of these is that we're all coming in through different channels, and some of us are potentially just learning what the term authoritarianism is about. Some of them might think it's about headlines, some think it's about authorship, and other people are coming into this from a different angle entirely. They've already started to see institutions and schools and hospitals starting to change the fine print in their policies quietly, and not always in ways that seem constructive or good for civic engagement. When we consider the ideas of things like protests, petitions, lawsuits, oversight investigations from legislators, these types of activities tend to bloom during resistance in the mobilization and escalation phases. So it's kind of the middle two of the phases. On the outside, awareness, we're still gathering information and learning about it. And transition, we've already done all the work and now we're leaving authoritarianism. In the middle here, mobilization and escalation, that's really where a lot of this is going to come into play. So phase-wise, a lot of what we discussed today is really about these middle two phases. The point is generally to grow all of our capacity together, which is why everybody is welcome at this time, and to make sure that we don't waste time or work backward. The first piece of foundation I want to make sure that we're setting here is that across countries and across decades, strong men, the top of an authoritarian regime, have frequently repeated the same patterns. This is often referred to as the authoritarian playbook. And that's not a specific document, even though there are documents named that. That's this idea of the core behaviors that an authoritarian uses. So when we consider some of this, the fact that there is an authoritarian playbook, it's important to recognize what its trend is, because this shows you the behavior of an authoritarian, and it starts to explain why some of the characterizations for effective resistance are what they are, because they are specifically undoing something the authoritarian is attempting, or they're at least disempowering that thing. Electoral autocracy, which is the kind of authoritarianism we're most likely to see in the United States, this is more like Putin's Russia or Erdogan's Turkey, and it's very similar to the approach taken by, Trump. These forms of authoritarianism are recognizable by Americans because they are designed to maintain a facade of democratic norms while actually undermining and dismantling those institutions at the same time. You'll see noisy theater about strength and, power, strong, tough, rough guards that Trump keeps bragging about in his various city occupations. He brags about the power of his weapons, which he clearly doesn't seem to understand. He uses a bunch of, and we've got to save them, only I can fix it kind of language, while he claims that cities are burning to the ground. You know, LA, we used to have a city called LA. We used to have a city called DC. We used to have a city called Portland, Oregon. But according to Trump, these are all burning to the ground right now. It's never true, and it's not true in Chicago either. But this is a normal script for an authoritarian. He's essentially trying to intimidate people from responding to him. So he wants the defense gone. He wants to scare them out of the pool. And at the same time, he wants to bait the opponents that do show up into a violent outburst. Because if he gets that, he can justify much more aggressive, much more repressive, much more violent crackdowns. So now that we know what we're resisting, how do we ensure that these strategies are as effective as possible? The first and arguably most important aspects of effective resistance is actually nonviolence. You might not understand why, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. But I want to be clear up at the very beginning. This is not about passivity. It's not about being a pacifist. It's about the discipline not to engage in violence, even when passions are high. Okay, decades of work coming from researchers like Gene Sharp, cataloging a whole bunch of nonviolent campaigns, close to 200 of them since 1900. He had this body of work that he cataloged and analyzed to show what was the most effective about these campaigns, what made them successful, what made them weaker, what made them take longer. There was a lot of great research here. And this is carried further by researchers like Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan in their analysis in Why Civil Resistance Works, which includes essentially cases of authoritarianism back to 1900 as evaluated. There are 300 of these that they consider, well, more than 300 of these that they considered for that book. And we've learned a lot about authoritarianism over the years because there's been a lot of authoritarianism and people willing to study it. So nonviolence is an incredibly important aspect of this because, first and foremost, it denies the strong man the path that they want to go down. This has multiple impacts, but the first is that going to be two sides of one coin. A strong man, okay, that's the name of the authoritarian at the top of the pyramid. The strong man wants a violent interaction because they want to stoke violence. They want to give justification to the strategy that they're trying to take that would be very, very aggressive. However, they really need some evidence of violence that they're putting down. Otherwise, they might lose too much support. So they try to stoke violence, and we end up doing two things by refusing to participate in that. The first is that the organization that the strong man is putting together is one that's designed for this. They surround themselves with loyalists who are not going to get in the way and are not going to hold them to the traditional notion of what the Constitution expected our government to be. So he's got these people in or around him instead of the career public servants that had been in our various executive branches. The DOJ is very notable in this regard. We've lost a lot of career service-oriented attorneys and counsels and officers inside the DOJ. They've left, they were disgusted, they were fired, and a lot of that skill left with them. What is left has not been capable of responding to the types of challenges that have been brought to it because they don't have those skills. So this brings us to the first side of the coin. When we engage in a nonviolent approach, we're not going down the path the president would like us to go, and we're exposing the fact that he now has a very weak government. They don't know how to do the job very well. He had people that could have seen these challenges and really litigated them. They probably would not have supported the president's view. But by getting rid of them, he's left with much less capacity to actually deal with the normal interaction of the DOJ. That's one side of the coin. The other side of that coin is that he also didn't get the benefit of getting to go into that violent interaction he was looking for. He had a pathway set up. He wanted to stoke violence, intimidate, and then be able to have aggressively more powerful crackdowns. But that doesn't work. We've taken away that avenue for him. He's disadvantaged by not having the avenue he planned for. So that first side of that first coin is a big bit. We exploit the vulnerability of not setting up the government he should have, and then we disadvantage him by not letting him go down the path he was trying to go. The second part of this nonviolence element is going to be more about the fact that it's easier to build a coalition that's nonviolent. Many people are not willing to show up to a resistance that they believe might spill into violence. They don't want to be harmed. So a substantial number of people that would participate otherwise will not. And that's a problem for a resistance that needs to show force and scale and presence and continuity. So this is one of the ways you make sure that you're much more appealing to people that would otherwise join your resistance. By committing to nonviolence, we also invite institutions that have now been overtaken by loyalists to still operate in the way they were designed to operate, which means people in that institution that have remained might be able to still support us from within an institution that always should have been our ally. This is true for a lot of the different parts of the executive branches. They used to be a source of justice. They used to be something we'd reach out to for help. And now they are the enforcement arm for a capricious president. They're not really working for us anymore. Now they're working against us at the whim of a president. Now, if this feels like nonviolence is not serious, because there are people who believe that skin in the game, blood in the game, that's how you show you mean it. That's how you get the president's attention. I hear you. Anger wants actions, and we're angry. But the immediate results that you're seeking are simply not doable. You don't fix this quickly. And if you just run headlong into the trap of trying to be violent, then you're essentially going to work against everybody. You're giving your opponent an enormous amount of power. You're essentially giving a provocateur your violence to use against you. So think of it this way instead. The restraint we want you to practice is going to be the fact that your opponent is desperate for a punch. So don't let them have it. This is the way you keep your power. Your anger is power. Keep it. All right, next we're going to talk about the idea of mass representation, mass participation. Mass participation isn't about moving in lockstep. It's not being all exactly of the same mind. It's actually much more about making room. A really diverse, large cohort, everybody in. There's room for all of us. Some of us are going to march. Some of us are going to cook. Some of us are going to file briefs. Some of us are going to watch kids for our friends. Some of us are going to talk to our neighbors who don't understand the news. Some of us are going to check in on elders that are being forgotten by programs that are being terminated without a lot of warning. Some might even be calling a counselor who's ready to change their vote in the right direction. Research, especially that from Chenoweth and Stephan, has outlined that sustained engagement from a small percent of the population can tip outcomes. The magic number that they found was 3.5%. When 3.5% of the population continuously showed up in a resistance, they always achieved results. So is 3.5 magical? Do we need to reach to that number? Do we need to go further? Have times changed? These questions I don't know, and I don't know that any of us could answer that question. I mean, I don't know that I can recognize the difference between 3.2 and 3.7. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the vibe is going to be enough, but sustained mass participation is going to be how we get there. And if you're not sure what all you could do, you don't have to be in a crowd. Okay, a lot of us don't like crowds, and some of us are scared of crowds. But even if you don't do those, you still belong. There are phones, there are letters to write, there are mutual aid chats, there's board meetings and procurement committees. There are smaller venues that could really benefit from your help. So find a way to participate. Participation should be understood to be a mosaic, not a single tile, not a single color. It's a lot of different pieces that together make up the whole picture. The third characteristic of effective resistance is the coordination of diverse tactics. This one is the one that many people feel is the most strategic, the most relevant, the most impactful. But I don't think that's entirely fair. You really needed the first two to make all of that happen. This is the way you make really good hay out of all of that resistance. Okay, one protest doesn't necessarily shift a system. It's a good thing. Sometimes it may cause more conversation, it may get a little bit of action, and it may be in the media, but compare that to a sequence. For example, a public testimony that turns into a records request, that turns into an oversight hearing, that turns into a strategic litigation, that turns into a targeted boycott or a protest. It turns into local policy pilots to make a change. It turns into press that can be celebrated when there are incremental steps forward, and it can also keep the story alive even when there are setbacks. When we think about this kind of interaction in layers and timing and handoffs, when our tactics come together in that kind of synergy, the pressure feels less like a storm, which can pass, and more like gravity, which is constant, inescapable, and something you're going to have to accept. The coordination of diverse tactics has an enormous impact, and if you don't know how to do that, but you are somebody who potentially has an opportunity like this, talk with more organizers, talk with other collaborators, contact Indivisible or Mobilize, but talk with somebody who's done this before to find out where do you get the best advice about how to make sure you've arranged your tactics for the most impact and you've made them available for other organizations to take impact from them as well. The fourth and final characteristic we're going to discuss. There are many more, but I was trying to pick the top 4 to keep this short, and also because it's easier to explain these. It gets more and more specific and less applicable as we go down the list. But the fourth major characteristic of efficient, effective resistance to an authoritarian is eroding the strong man's support. Okay, this is not something that necessarily all of us can do, but more of us can do it than you might think. There's a positive side on this too. It's not just that we want to cut away the support. We want to give dignity in the off-ramp from people that were supporting them. Authoritarians depend on their enablers. So whether it's financiers, legislators, media figures, the tech oligarchy, people defect from that kind of support when the cost and the difficulty and the danger are rising, and when the exits are safe. So we should offer an off-ramp, a graceful one, where possible. When it's your neighbors, if they can rejoin a common project without humiliation, that's a big deal. Let them feel like they're part of the community that we're part of. I get why you hoped that he would fix things, but we're actually going to go fix things. Come with us. Let's fix them together. This is a message you can deliver. You don't always have exactly that phrasing to offer because maybe that doesn't fit the kinds of things you're fixing, but find a way to open those doors. It matters an enormous amount that somebody reaches out to you when you are on the outside. While I think that these 4 primary factors are very straightforward and understandable, I like to think of them in a much different way as the truth. I like a much gentler metaphor. And for this, I'm going to use the gravestone of Tennessee Williams. It reads, "The violets in the mountains have broken the rocks." I love that. I love that. Time, weather, roots, freeze thaw, sand, the wildflowers. This is what reshapes stone. It may take thousands of years, but they reshape stone. The violets don't bludgeon the stone, they persist. The root action, these tiny moments, a flower that is so small, so insubstantial as to be little more than breath, it cooperates with everything around it to reshape stone. That's how I think about us. Equal dignity, an honest process, a future our kids can count on. We aren't at war with the mountain, and we shouldn't be. The mountain yearns to be free. We have to bring it with us. Where this leaves us is that if you're angry, you're not alone. Keep your power, though. Don't hand it to a provocateur. If crowds aren't for you, choose a lane you can keep. Quiet help wins wars. If someone wants out of a harmful alignment, hold that door for them. That's how coalitions grow. If you lead, you need to coordinate. You have to stack your tactics, share credit, celebrate the small wins, keep the story moving, keep the story visible. Now, I'm obviously an optimist. I think that a lot of people can tell. It's not because I think the harm isn't real. It is because I think the patterns that defeat that harm are real. It's because those are available to us. We can prove those are happening. Some of the harm hasn't landed yet. I think that we can prevent it, but that's going to be something that requires coalition. If this stirs questions in you, drop them in the comments, please. I've been trying to go through the last video and answer all of them, but I'll spend at least a week answering any video's questions. If it gives you a little bit of a calm, if it gives you a reprieve from the stress or the fear and anger and the confusion that a lot of us have been stewing in, share this with somebody else who needs that. This needs to be our mission for a while. We need to reach out. You don't have to share my video. Feel free to take my notes. Just go talk with the people. Tell them that you believe there's a path forward, and if they're scared and if they're sort of compressing into a smaller and smaller form, something that is very defensive as a posture, then go try to help them become a human again. Until next time, though, we can engage safely, we can engage wisely, and we need to look for places that you and your neighbors can become the violets that break the rocks.